Hello, my name is Julie, and it's time to talk about all the books that I read in August. So this month, my full-time job, first ever out of college, finally picked up steam. For the first half of the month, I was like, okay, I'm really getting through the books that I'm reading. This is great. Should be on track. For books, I was, but I didn't notice how all of the books that I was reading were short. So I was way behind on my page count. In the last week, I tried to play catch up, so we can see how that played out in my stats. In August, I read 14 books. That is the most amount of books that I've read in a single month. But pages-wise, I read 4,369, which for this year is the second lowest page count in a month. My average rating was 3.67, which is on the high end. I read 3 5 stars, which is a record, but that did get balanced out with an equal amount of 2 stars. I read about 312 pages per book, which is much lower than normal, and I read on average 140 pages per day. I read 6 books from my physical shelf, but I added 3, so now as an overall 2023 net TBR shelf, I have taken off 4 books. Genre-wise, this pie chart is extremely indicative of what we see in my 2023 overall stats. Number 1 being fantasy, and number 2, tied, is mystery thriller and science fiction, and a little bit of everything else. We have a lot of physical books, but I did try out my library for the first time, very happy with that, and a surprising showing of ebooks. Now if we talk about Summer of Series, this was a challenge on Instagram hosted by Reading with Marlo, very fun account, and the challenge was to just read as many books in series as you can from June to August. So you got extra bonus points if you were caught up to publication or if you finished a series, but you could read any series you wanted. You could start series, you didn't have to read the whole thing. It was great. So I read 17 books in 17 different series because I don't like doing sequels back to back because I'm weird. 4 of these series I got caught up on, and 3 of them I completed, which is great. 9 of these were first books in a series. 3 of them were conclusions to a series. Actually, all of those were duologies. And 5 of them were sequels. So of the 14 series on here that I have not finished, 9 of these and maybe 1 more I am planning on continuing in. So that's a pretty good showing, I think. Now let's get into the ridiculous amount of books that I'm going to review, and hopefully this will be short. The first book that I read in August was You Must Not Miss by Katrina Leno. This is a YA speculative novel. I read Katrina Leno before. Summer of Salt is one of my favorite YA books of all time. This is about our main character, Magpie, who is a high schooler going through the worst time in her life. She found her dad cheating on her mom. Her mom then turned to her alcoholism again, and then her sister went up to college and has completely cut connection with the family. And on top of that, there was an incident that happened to her that was very traumatic that also caused her best friend of many years to essentially break up with her. And so Magpie is left floating. She doesn't want to do school, she doesn't want to take anything seriously, and the only thing that she really wants to invest time in is this world of Near that she has created, which is this perfect world where everything goes her way. And then one day she goes into her shed and accidentally shows up in Near, but this world that she's created is actually real. So I am a self-proclaimed lover of weird books. Magical realism, particularly hard-hitting YA magical realism, one of my favorite things. This, however, did not do it for me. This was weird and didn't necessarily take a turn that I really liked. It definitely got a little bit of a horror element that I wasn't expecting necessarily. I was definitely anticipating a different arc from this than we actually got. It was more a revenge story than a coming of age story. But I really didn't connect to the characters as much as I did with the other book by her that I really liked, and I just struggled to get the point other than escapism for the main character. I understood that what she was going through was really terrible, and in that way I empathized with her, but I didn't really connect with her, and I think that that's what would sell this book to somebody. So I ended up giving this a 3-star. I just don't have a lot to say. Then I read 2 books for my Julie vlog, which was where I read 4 books that were by Julie's and Julia's, And if you want to get my full review for both of these books, that video is up here. One of my favorite videos I've ever done. So I read The Lies I Tell by Julie Clark. This is a suspensey, not quite domestic thriller. It's hard to categorize this book for me. This is about Meg Williams, who is a con woman. She has made her living by conning people and has been getting away with it for over 10 years. And Kat is a former reporter. She wants to be a novelist, and because she started to find out a little bit about Meg that caused her life to be ruined, she is trying to track down Meg and expose her so that she can get her revenge. So Meg finally shows up back to her hometown with her real name and seems to be running a real estate scheme now, and Kat thinks that this is the perfect opportunity to try to sneak in with her. This was just a really fun book. Some of the time we are spending following Meg's past cons, and it is so fun to watch Meg purposefully pick terrible men and use the things that make them terrible so that she can take advantage of them and take their entire lives away from them. And I really liked how Kat is also caught up in this, and she's trying to toe the line between getting into Meg's trust while also trying not to trust Meg herself. So I ended up giving this a 4-star. If you want to hear more of my thoughts, again, video's up there. And then I read The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz, and this was such an easy 5-star for me. This is about our main character, Alex, who hasn't written a single word since her and her best friend, Ren, broke up. And there is a writing retreat / competition that their writing idol is hosting. And whoever wins is going to get a 6-figure publishing deal. Alex gets chosen, but so does Ren. And then the competition stakes keep getting higher, and also a lot of weird things have happened in the house in the past and are happening now. This was a great blend of thriller and horror that kept me on my toes, kept me wanting to read, and I loved what this said about our main character trying to process things happening to her, and about writing and creation and the struggle with that when you have a lot of self-identity problems. And I just love how this shifted from like a domestic thriller to something a little bit more out there. This is definitely a love it or hate it thriller, and I am 100% can't love it. I think that the best recommendation I can give is if you liked Bonnie, I think that this might be your kind of thriller. Then for my 12 books from 12 friends in 12 months challenge, I read Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have loved every single one of Taylor Jenkins Reid's books, Evelyn Hugo, since. All of the historical fiction books that she's written, I have given 5 stars. Her pre-Evelyn Hugo books, I give like 3 stars maybe. This book, I ended up giving a 4-star. This is about Carrie Soto, who is a tennis legend. She has been raised by her also tennis player father, who is her coach, to be the very best. And they have been pushing her and pushing her to just be the best because she is the best. And she retired not long after becoming the best tennis player in the world, and now, like 10 years later, a younger player has just surpassed her record, and Carrie decides that she is going to step back in the ring and take back her title and show everybody that she is the greatest. I really liked how much this is about an unlikable female character who has a lot of traits that are typically masculine, and how women are criticized so much more no matter what you do. I think this definitely has a lot of themes that are similar to the Barbie movie in that way. The thing that I've really loved about the other 3 entries in her historical fiction series has been how real these characters have seemed. And even though I really liked a lot of the tennis that we're playing, I like the arc of the main character, I didn't feel that same realism. I didn't feel like Carrie was coming off of the page as much as these other characters. Even though I did feel for her, I really liked the arc with her dad, and I really liked her interactions with the other tennis players, even though they were few and far between. As a person who doesn't know tennis very well, this made me want to get into tennis. Like, should I be watching Wimbledon? I still think that Taylor Jenkins Reid from here on out is an auto by author. I still really love her dedication to women who aren't always perfect and are in the spotlight. This was a solid 4-star that I got through pretty quickly, but probably my least favorite of her historical fictions. Then I listened to Camp Zero by Michelle Min Sterling. This is a dystopian book where we take place hundreds of years in the future when climate change is really affecting the planet. And we have 3 different perspectives that we follow. One of our main characters, Rose, is essentially a spy sent to this place called Camp Zero, where she is posing as essentially a concubine. And this camp is going to be this future utopia by this guy who has really strong philosophical ideas in this frozen wasteland in Canada. We have another character, Grant, who is this rich trust fund boy who wants to be an English professor and was offered a job at Camp Zero. And all of these women are sent by the military on this mission that they're not really sure what it is, and they form a family around it. I thought this book was trying to be Emily St. John Mandel so badly and absolutely did not accomplish it. I didn't care about the characters. I didn't care about any of the Camp Zero plot itself. I really loved the White Alice part. This is told in a plural perspective. None of these women are ever named, and they're referred to as a collective, which was really interesting and something that I like seeing. This was the only plot that I actually wanted to know more about. I definitely don't think I'm gonna remember anything about this book in a couple of months, so this was like a 2.5, maybe a 3. I just didn't care. Then I read Artificial Condition by Martha Wells. This is the second book in the Murderbot series, which is a bunch of novellas. I think they're moving into novels now. Set far in the future, it's a space opera about Murderbot, who is a security robot who in the past has been told that it killed everybody on its team, and it knows nothing about that incident. And in this book, Murderbot has decided that it is going to separate from its new group that wants to accept it and investigate more about what happened in its past and if it might hurt people again. And I thought that this was such an improvement on the first book. The first book, I felt like I didn't really care about anybody. I didn't have as much of a grasp on it, and I listened to the audiobook for this, thought the narration was great, and I loved the banter. I feel like I really got the humor of this book so much more, of Murderbot talking about how it's not human, it's not XYZ, it's not a person, it doesn't feel anything, on and on and on, but it really does. And I really loved its interactions with art and the other robots and pieces of technology in this, and I really liked the small heist thing that we have going on in this book. This was really short, but it was also a win. So I give this a 4-star, and I am much more excited to read the next books in this series because the first one was only okay. Then for my book club, 3 of Clubs, from July to September, we are reading Greek myth retellings. So this month we're reading Ariadne. And I actually have 2 copies of this from Book of the Month because one of my copies fully just fell apart. The pages fully separated from the binding, but Book of the Month did send me another one. So thank you to them for at least fixing that. This is a retelling of Ariadne, the character from Greek myth, whose brother is the Minotaur, and she helps Theseus defeat the Minotaur and escape the labyrinth. This is supposed to be one of the feminist retellings for fans of Circe, and I felt that this failed on just about every level. It tells the myth again, and I think it does talk about womanhood and motherhood in a way that adds something to the original myth. Maybe it has a little bit more critique of Theseus, and that's about it. Ariadne is the most boring character in this book. She is essentially a middleman for the plot. She doesn't actually do anything except help one person help out a different person, which really bothers me because she is one of the figures in Greek myth that is a woman who is not villainized, who actually has some agency. We have a weird shift of it being a third about her sister, which begged a lot of questions for me. Why aren't we following both of them? Why is it just called Ariadne? Why aren't we following all of the different perspectives that would actually show any action? Because Ariadne doesn't see any of the action take place in this book. Everything is told to her. And I don't know about you, but show don't tell is one of the big things that anyone has ever taught about writing. And you know, the more I think about this book, the more infuriated I am by it, but it didn't really offend me. I was okay with it when I was reading it. So like at first I rated it a 3, and then the more that I talk about it, the more the things that are sticking with me are the things that I really didn't like. So it's like a 2-star for me. I think that this really failed to do any sort of retelling. If you'd like to read a better book with us, we are going to be reading Lore Olympus, Volume 1. We might continue into other volumes because it's short, it's a graphic novel, it's also a webcomic available online for free. But if you'd like to join us, the link is in the description for the Discord. Then the very nice people at Tor gave me an arc of Mammoths at the Gates by Nevo. This is the 4th book in the Singing Hills cycle, which is a series of novellas that can be read in any order. They're all connected by the same main character, Chi, who is a monk whose job is to collect stories around the land. And Chi is finally returning to the Singing Hills Abbey after being away for like 3 years, and finds out that their mentor and the leader of the monks, Cleric Thean, has passed away. And they are about to do the funeral rites, but Thean's granddaughters are there to collect their body. And the monks don't want to give up the body, so they're a little bit at an impasse. I've only read the first book, and this book I haven't read the other 2, and this one is 100 pages versus like 150, so this one was shorter than the other book that I've read, and it was also more singularly focused on this one event, but I also felt like it didn't have as much of the really pretty language and fantastical elements of this, which makes sense because it is essentially about a funeral. My favorite part was at the ending when we're actually having the funeral and everybody's telling these different stories about Thean, and we see how some people perceive this person as being like a saint, but in their past they were also not that great of a person. So it's showing this really complicated image of this one person, which I really thought was good. This isn't what I would start with for this series because I feel like it's different from the other books, but I still enjoyed it, so I gave it like a 3.5. Then, years after finishing the first era of Mistborn, I have finally dipped into the second era of Mistborn with the Alloy of Law. This takes place hundreds of years after Mistborn Era 1 ends, and we are now in more of an industrial type era. People have guns, there are trains, and there's like a Western setting mixed with the fantasy city setting that we know from the first books. So our main characters, Wax and Wayne, have been vigilante justice people out in the fantasy Old West, and Wax has now been called back to the city to now be a lord because his uncle has passed away. And he is also finding out there's a bunch of stuff that is being stolen by some sort of underground group, and Wax and Wayne decide that they are going to investigate what's going on. I thought this was so much fun. This is shorter than any of the other books in this series because I feel like it's giving you more of a vibe for this setting, but I absolutely loved the evolution of this world. I loved our main characters, and I just had a ridiculous amount of fun reading this. Wax and Wayne are such great characters to bounce off each other. I loved Marasi as well. She was such like a nerdy character that I could really relate to, and I just thought that their personalities bounced off each other so well. And the thing that probably was the best done in this book is the evolution of the world. Basically, all of the big players from the first series are now like religious figures. They're the names of cities and streets and the inspiration for a million different things. We are slowly given little hints to what has been inspired by who. I also loved how the 2 magic systems, Allomancy and Feruchemy, whatever, are combined in this. So of course we have the typical Mistborn antics where we have people pushing and pulling on different types of metals and all that type of thing, but now we have Feruchemy, which is Sazed's magic, also being blended in this. So a lot of people have both, and Wax, our main character, has both the ability to push on things and he can also change his weight, which from an engineering physics nerd, was the most compelling thing ever to read. How he is pushing off in different directions, changing his weight at the same time. I absolutely love the amount of thought that goes into just the physics of this world. It really makes me think about how critical I was of the first series, because I do adore them so much, and I think I only gave them like 4 stars, 4.5. They should be 5s. This one's also a 5. I fucking love this book. If you were unsure about continuing on in the series like I was, rest assured, you are in good hands. Of course you are. It's Brandon Sanderson. Then I read A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is a reimagining of Dracula's brides. So Dracula, very famous character in literature, but his brides are like a background piece almost of some of the adaptations of this. This is from the perspective of Constanta, who was a woman from like Eastern Europe in the medieval times, and she is Dracula's first bride. He saves her from dying and lures her in, makes her feel so special, but she's also kind of his servant, and it's a very sensual yet dangerous relationship. As the years go on, their relationship starts to shift, and he also brings more people into their relationship. Constanta also, because she's been there the longest, she sees how he is manipulating the others, because she was also manipulated that way, and she is trying to free her and her family from Dracula, who is never actually named in the book, which I thought was a really powerful thing. This is told in second person. It's told in letters that she is writing to Dracula about the abuse that she and the others got, how she was in love with him so much, and how she can't really separate those feelings. And I just absolutely love this. This is such a red wine book. These people are so obsessed and in love with each other and always on top of each other all of the time, but there's also a lot of complicated feelings under that. I loved the writing in here, and the vibes overall were just stunning. There's not a whole lot of plot, but there's a lot of themes. There's a lot of vibes, great writing, and characters that you get attached to immediately. This is getting the attention it deserves, and I'm so glad that this was traditionally published after being picked up from being indie. This was another easy 5 stars for me. I ran through this in under 24 hours. Then I read the sequel to one of my favorite books of this year. Unfortunately, it was my biggest disappointment of the year, and that is Heart of the Sun Warrior by Sulin Tun. Daughter of the Moon Goddess is the first book, and it is about the moon goddess Chang'e and the archer who killed the 9 extra suns, their daughter, and her mother is trapped in the moon. And in this Circe meets Mulan story, she goes through years of trying to build herself up so that she can finally get a favor from the emperor, who actually imprisoned her mother, so she can get her mother out. Along the way, she meets a lot of people who she loves. There's betrayal, there's heartache, there's so much yearning, and I fucking loved book 1. I thought the plot was amazing, the main character particularly, was amazing. I love Xinyan in the first book, and the love triangle was done really well. And then in the second book, from the very opening pages, I could tell that this did not have the same elements of the first book that I loved at all. Xinyan immediately takes to lying to everybody. The love triangle goes from something nuanced to something entirely cliche that I saw coming from literally the first pages, how the book was going to end. I think it had itself set up for some really good plot twists and then just didn't execute on it, and the plot was way lower stakes than the first book. I'm listening to the audiobook in my car and I'm literally yelling at this book. I hardly even believe that this was written by the same author, and I want to scrub this from my mind because I am still so obsessed with book 1, but book 2 is so wildly different. It feels like a prank. So I gave this like a 2.5 star because there are some leftover things that I liked from the first book, but I have hardly ever been so disappointed by a sequel. Then I read A History of What Comes Next by Sylvain Neuvel. I've read the Sleeping Giants trilogy from him before, and I actually read this at the same time that I watched Oppenheimer, which is really interesting because this is about the space race and has some overlap with World War II. So this is about a race of aliens who essentially make one clone of themselves every single generation. So there's only like ever 2 of them alive at once, and they have been around on Earth for centuries, for millennia, with one thing that they have passed down every generation, and that is take them to the stars. They have the mission of trying to get humanity off planet before they are all destroyed. But everything else has been sort of lost to time about who they are, where they come from. And so our main character, Mia, and her mother, Sarah, were raised in Germany around World War I, World War II times, and in this book they are trying to influence a bunch of different people across the globe to try to ramp up the space race to get people off planet. So like at the beginning, we're talking to Werner von Braun, which is super interesting as I am an aerospace engineer and he's the father of rocketry. Here's the thing though, this didn't give enough of that history and the science, I think, for me to really love this book. I think if the author took time to make this book longer and go into more specifics about what our main characters are doing and the different players in the space race, this would have been so much more fascinating and more lauded. Meanwhile, everybody's been rating this 3 stars because we barely even see any of this thing happen on page. I will say, I really loved the alien plot. Anytime we're learning about the past generations of these aliens, anytime we're trying to investigate more about them, absolutely adored it. On the other hand, it's also another case of written by a man syndrome, where we just have an author who doesn't care to have us care about these characters. Like, they don't care about characterizing these people. But I did, on the other hand, really like the discussion of these people having some sort of fate, and they have on paper a destiny that they are supposed to fulfill, and some people don't want to go along with that, which I think is interesting. So I was on the fence about this one, so I gave it a 3 star. That's how it goes. Then my first book from my library, I ended up reading Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail. She Doesn't Fail. I have always thought that this title was Doesn't Fall, but it's Fail, by Ashley Herring Blake. This is the sequel companion novel to Delilah Green Doesn't Care, which I liked. I think I gave like a 3.5 or 4, but I think I enjoyed this one even more. This is about Delilah's stepsister, Astrid, who has been primed by her mother her entire life to be the golden child, perfect person, and she is currently an interior designer and is kind of running into a rut, especially since in the first book things fell out between her and her fiance, who wasn't good for her anyway, and she's just kind of stuck in her life and doesn't realize that she's not happy because she has been put into a box by her mother. And she has been hired as a local designer for a renovation of an old manor house, which is going to be turned into an inn. And Jordan is the granddaughter of the owner of the house. She has been struggling with loss lately, and she is coming back to be the contractor and has very specific ideas about what she wants for this house. And this whole process is going to be filmed and put on HGTV. When the two of them start clashing about designs, the TV show's like, let's actually play into this, let's play it up. But then things start to go awry with that as Jordan kind of starts going against Astrid's ideas. On the same time, the two of them are starting to form a connection, and they might be into each other, and neither of them thinks that they're really ready for that. I loved both of their individual arcs in this, and I loved the chemistry between them. I think that this has a pretty predictable plot when it comes to the actual like renovation of the house, but I thought it had a great amount of that plot. They both had relatable problems that they were dealing with. They balanced each other very well in trying to show how the other person is skewing their life, and I just really loved the two of them together. This is one of my favorite rom-coms that I've read this year, and depending on how long it'll stay with me, it'll either be a 4 or a 5. So we're sitting at a 4.5 right now. You know, I was worried with this one because I didn't think that this plot was going to interest me going into it, but it ended up being something I totally loved. And the last book that I read this month was Our Violent Ends by Chloe Gong. This is the sequel and conclusion to These Violent Delights, which is Romeo and Juliet set in 1920s Shanghai with rival gangs. There's also kind of a plague thing going on, communism's a problem, blah, 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 blah. I really like the elements of the series that are a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, which is a play that I have studied a couple times and I do absolutely love. I really liked the relationships in this book, both friendships and romantic relationships. I think that was the strongest part of this book. I liked the political aspects of this as well, but I thought that the fantasy plot, first of all, it was kind of put to the wayside, especially since this book is shelved as fantasy. I thought that was kind of weird, that maybe it should be more shelved as historical fiction, considering that the fantasy plot is so little of this one, that on one hand, the stakes felt lower, but on the other hand, the stakes were like real life things, so it should have felt higher. I don't know. For this one, I felt like, compared to the first book, I was less engrossed in the plot itself, but I was more, or the same amount, engrossed with the characters and their relationships. Specifically with Juliet and Roma, like every time that they were together and they were on the same page, I like breathed a sigh of relief. Something about that was really satisfying and I really liked their relationship together. I don't think that I will continue on into the sequel series about this. I don't think that that's something that I'm really interested in. Rosalind's not a character that I would particularly want to follow. And also, I didn't really like Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong, so I don't know if I will continue reading from her. I did listen to this on audiobook, but I would not recommend it. I didn't love the narrator's voices, especially because so many of them are just whispering, so you can't actually hear what she's saying without blowing your ears out a second later. So definitely read this one physically. But I ended up giving this like a 3.5 or a 4 star. So that was shorter than I thought it was gonna be, but those are the 14 books that I read in August. Let me know down below, have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? Did you think the opposite of what I thought? Because I think I had a lot of controversial opinions on this one. Let me know what books you read in August because I'd love to talk about them. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, if you'd like to follow me anywhere, my link is in the description with everything I do: Etsy, Discord, Instagram, Goodreads, everything. And as always, I will see you in the next one.